The topic today is the strategic importance of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. And I know we can go on many different tacks on this and interweave many different topics about the importance of Israel, its democratic, its Jewish natures, and so forth. But let's just ask the question immediately: what is the strategic importance of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria? And is there a difference between Jerusalem on the one hand and Judea and Samaria on the other?
Jerusalem is probably the most sacred and the most important value and site and symbol for the Jewish people's future. And it symbolizes actually the entire history of the Jewish people. You see, Jerusalem goes down to the core of the identity of the Jewish people. This is where we have become a nation. You know, if Abraham made us, let's say, a family, a clan, if you like, a tribe, and then Moses made us a people, it was King David who made us a nation through actually establishing our sovereignty over the state of Israel or Zion with the center in Jerusalem. And if we go back more than 3,000 years, 3,020 years, you look at the Jerusalem, which was the capital of no other people rather than the Jewish people. There have been many who controlled Jerusalem and the land, but they were not sovereigns. They were not the owner of Jerusalem or the land. They were either occupiers or visitors, mostly occupying it by force. So to deny any link between the Jewish people and Jerusalem is to try and really decimate and kill and do away the Jewish people, a people which is rich with culture for almost 4,000 years, which has brought to the world all the real values of ethics and of morals and of beliefs in the goodness of man and God. So this is why no one can ever think of as a Jew or as a Christian who believes in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testaments, that Jerusalem can be taken away, or parts even of Jerusalem. Just like you cannot parcel or you cannot half a heart in two, you cannot do this to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is our history and it's also our future. We have to remember, and Ira, that unfortunately we've had trials and tribulations over so many centuries. 2,000 years we were away from our land because of force and occupiers, and we were dispersed all over the world in more than 150 different countries. Now, what kept us as a people was Jerusalem. Praying to Jerusalem, thinking of Jerusalem, yearning for Jerusalem. Now, as we are back in Jerusalem, we are now incumbent to keep Jerusalem as Jerusalem kept us. Without Jerusalem, then there is no reason why we should be here, why we should grow our children here, why we should build our future here, and why we should defend our lives here. So this is the importance of Jerusalem from the symbolic, from the identity point of view. But also, if you look at the topography, the hills, the Judean hills, which the highest points are the mountains of Jerusalem, topographically are very, very important to strategically defend this land. Before 1967, the waste of the land of Israel was about 9 miles from the Mediterranean to the Green Line. If you go a little bit further to the east, you have the Jordan River. from the Jordan River and even eastern than that to the Mediterranean, the only strategic land that can defend it is the Jerusalem areas. And this is also why Jerusalem is so important. But I would say this is only second to what it means to us and to our very core identity, as I mentioned before.
Oh, thank you. We'll talk about Jerusalem as a symbolic and as a strategic importance in terms of Jewish identity. But I want to talk about Judea and Samaria for a second in terms of how you mentioned it with relation to Jerusalem and Israeli borders. Is Judea and Samaria important simply for a security or military importance, or does Judea and Samaria also have a symbolic or a national or a peoplehood sense of Jewish identity as well?
Absolutely. Judea and Samaria is the cradle of our civilization. You know, we have to remember, Judaism is not just a faith, it's not just a religion. It's not just a way of life. It's an entire culture and civilizations. And we were born and made right there in Judea and Samaria. Before even the temple in Jerusalem, we've had the Ohel Moed, the Mishkan in Shiloh, and Bethel, and of course Hebron with the cave of the patriarchs. Every inch in Judea and Samaria is filled with rich Jewish history and culture. And just as a people that do not remember or do not cherish their past, they cannot have a future. So the importance here is just like in Jerusalem, very, very important symbolically, morally, historically, ethically, but also if you add to that the security dimension, then again, this is the only meaningful buffer that we have between the populations of Israel and any incoming advancing military, whether it's from Jordan, whether it's from Iraq or Iran. And we know that there's still many, many threats to Israel. It's just changing names. Saddam Hussein, the former leader of Iraq, he threatened to set Israel on fire. Khomeini and Khamenei of Iran today are talking about destroying Israel as well. So we must have this buffer. And also, it is very important to look at the recent history. Until 1967, when Israel did not have its land of Judea and Samaria, there wasn't a day go by without terrorism infiltrating from over the Green Line to the central Israel. Since we are there, there is no terrorism whatsoever coming from the east, because the Jordan River is a natural border and it is sealed. No infiltration come through the Jordan River or crossing the Jordan River. We do have some terror, which is ingrown in the Palestinian area. But this is something that we can take care of, although it's very costly, unfortunately. But there is no existential threat to Israel when we have our land in Judea and Samaria, all the way to the Jordan River.
No, I appreciate that. And when you look in every time Israel is spoken about in the Bible, it always mentions from Dan to Beersheba. It's not about the northern part or the southern part. It looks at Judea and Samaria, or what we call today Judea and Samaria, as such an integral part of what constitutes Israel as a homeland of the Jewish people. And if we recognize that, and we recognize that even relying on the Bible as an expression or a description of the homeland for the Jewish people, which even the Declaration of the Establishment of Israel mentions, I have to ask, it might seem like a simple question, but if Judea and Samaria has such symbolic identity importance, almost akin to Jerusalem, why has there been such distinctions between Jerusalem is so important, let's hold off and have more conversation about Judea and Samaria? Why, if we rely on Jewish history, we rely on the Bible, we rely on our identity, do we make these distinctions when they don't seem to be distinguishable?
Well, quite honestly, Ira, this distinction is quite, I would say, arbitrary one. It's an artificial one. It may have been done because of some political reasons after 67, not to aggravate maybe our enemies or public opinions worldwide. The government, Labor government in 1967, after the 67 war, they declared Jerusalem as our capital. But they stopped short there because they didn't want the ire of the international community. Not that the international community appreciates anything or any concessions that we make. We have to understand that every country, every people who is really, as we say, chafetz chaim, who seeks life and, of course, cherishes life, has to be able to defend itself. Defending is through values, through solidarity among the people, through faith, and, of course, through territory as well.
Well, since you brought up 1967 international relations, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about international law and international relations. I've seen, I'm sure you've seen much more than me, how legal scholars, politicians, political advocates, and so forth, on either side of this conversation, use international law to justify their argument. How important is international law in determining the borders of Israel? Has it become simply a tool for rhetoric? Is it, especially in today's world of realpolitik, where is the role, or where is the position or space for international law to be relevant in this discussion?
Well, I would say that international law is important and is applicable to the extent that there are no biases, that it's equal to all nations and all countries. Unfortunately, we do not see this the case. If we look at international law, then we have to go back, and just for recent history, I'm talking about the last 100 or so years, because there is no a doubt that if you look at the archaeology, at the history, at the books, at all the accounts of the historians, all the way back from 3,000 years ago, there is no doubt that this land, Judea and Samaria, the land of Israel, Zion, is only Jewish. But we know the circumstances over the years, unfortunately, that we were expelled from here, but we returned. This is also something which is unique in the annals of history and mankind. But if we go back, 1917, the occupying power that was given the mandate by the international community over the land here was the United Kingdom, Great Britain. And 1917, the United Kingdom was decreeing what is called the Balfour Declaration, that the land of Palestine, and again, Palestine is a Roman name that was given back on the 3rd century by Adrian, the emperor of Rome, in order to actually erase and sever any connections between the people and the land. So he called it Palestine. It's not an Arabic word. It's a Roman word. In any case, the land was called Palestine, which was a territorial entity, but there was no any people there, just like there's no people in the Sahara or in the Antarctica. It's just a region. In any case, Palestine at the time, also aka the land of Israel, was given to the Jewish people. Now, not only it was the Great Britain, it was also endorsed in San Remo in 1922 by then the League of Nations. So you have an international endorsement here. Now, the League of Nations, of course, dispersed after World War II. And then there was a new organization, the United Nations. But the United Nations went right into the shoes of the League of Nations, taking all the obligations and commitments of the League of Nations. So this is by international law. If you don't make it a kangaroo court, which what the United Nations is today, then in a legal way, this is our land, not only historically, but also by international law. Again, if you look at it objectively and not changing it as you will. Today, the problem that we have is that the international community has been hijacked by Arab majority in the United Nations, by the Palestinians who have threatened their Arab countries and other countries. And since they make the law, they have turned it into a kangaroo court against us, by the way, not just against Israel. It's also against the United States and against many democratic countries, again, to the extent and frustration of some in the international community who say, well, we cannot do away with the United Nations because this is the only, let's say, organization, the only game in town where you have all countries together, somehow dialoguing. But just as there are other organizations which are based on a region or maybe on ideology or a religion, like the Islamic group, the Arab League, some say we should have an organization which is based on democracy. All democratic countries should also have their organization. And there, I believe Israel will have really a seat of honor.
So you lead me to a number of questions. I'll take them in one by one, if you don't mind. So the first one with regards to international law, and thank you for clarifying some of the both documents and chronology. But does international law give Israel an exclusionary right or an exclusionary sovereignty over Israel? And then leading to that, if the United Nations has become really a platform for politics as opposed to jurisprudence, how has the new relationships between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, how do you see that changing the perspective or the view on Israel's sovereignty over its own land?
Sure. Well, Ira, as to the exclusivity, well, here is where politics come and pragmatism. So because the Arabs of Palestine, which were not called Palestinians, during this mandate, as we mentioned, Palestine was not really a political entity, but a region, a land that was actually ruled by Great Britain. In this Palestine, there were two people, Jewish Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs, and this is how they were called and referred to. Since there was no peace between these two peoples, since the Arabs kept attacking and terrorizing their Jewish neighbors, United Kingdom said, well, we cannot handle it anymore. Let's take it to the international community. In 1937, there was an international committee called the Peel Committee, trying to really establish here a peace and some kind of a arrangement between between the Jewish people of Palestine and the Arabs, and they came with the idea of partition. The Jewish community back in 1937, headed by David Ben-Gurion, before he became prime minister, accepted this, even though it was very, very painful, excruciatingly painful, because it was like cutting the land into two. But in order to make peace, we said we will make this concession. The Arab Palestinians refused. For them, it was all or nothing. Nothing came out of it. World War II came and went with, of course, the horrific Holocaust. And back in 1947, the United Nations now also had a vote to partition the land and end the British mandate. And here I quote from the resolution 181, which was adopted on November 29th, 1947. They talked about partition of the land to, and I quote, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Again, Jews accepted, the Arabs did not. We declared, according to this UN, again, if we go back to your former question about international law, we declared our state. I would say it was in a way, it was re-establishing. We didn't establish the state, and the United Nations did not establish us back in 1947 or 48. We were established 3,000 years ago by King David, and even before. But let's say modern Israel was re-established in 1947 by a UN resolution, international law, and the declaration in May 48 ensuing and actually fulfilling, realizing this resolution. The Arabs attacked, they lost, and unfortunately, all these agreements, once that there is violence, they are all null and void, also according to international law. At the end of the war of 1948, Israel had its land, what is called the Green Line, before 67, very small sliver of land. By the way, if you look at the entire Middle East, 22 Arab countries, one Jewish, 99.7% of the land is Arab, and Muslim only 0.3% is Israeli, and still they are trying to get it, which tells you it's not about territory, it's about not having us here at all. But in any case, after this war, we won the war, and very fortunately, otherwise we wouldn't be here today, and there would be another Holocaust. But the end of the war, Jordan occupied Judea and Samaria, and not only it occupied it, it annexed it. 1952, there was a formal annexation of Jordan, which was recognized only by two countries, Pakistan and the United Kingdom. And until 67, it was Jordan. When in the War of Self-Defense of 67, we liberated Judea and Samaria, and since then, we are there. There were also attempts to reconcile this conflict. Many ideas came about, again, two-state solutions, 2 states for 2 peoples. But to all the concessions Israel made, different governments, right and left, were not met in the same manner by the Palestinians. Now they're called the Palestinians. And unfortunately, we are now in a situation where, although we were willing to take and make a lot of concessions, now it would be irresponsible for us to do it when there are people here, Palestinians, who are really are avowed on our destruction.
Do you think the international community will change its perspective as the relationships between Israel and other Arab nations become more normalized or lead to further peace in the region? Or do you think that the relationships that Israel has developed with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco won't have the same effect in terms of changing the conversation about Judea and Samaria?
Well, what governs international politics and diplomacy is not values or truth. It's just a balance of power, and it's just interests. And today, if you look at the new landscape in the Middle East and in the world, you see that the Palestinian problem is no longer high on the agenda. And there are quite a few reasons for that. First of all, the Arab countries have realized that Israel is on their side. The moderate Sunni Arab countries, their main threat is radical Islam, Sunni Islam, like Al-Qaeda or Hamas or ISIS, and radical Shia, like the Hezbollah, and of course the Ayatollahs in Iran. This is an existential threat to the Sunni Arab countries. Israel is with them. Israel is actually protecting them or helping them together to deter the Iranians and also some terror groups as well. Also, if we look at the challenges of this region in the Middle East and indeed the world for the future, to make this region and the world, our planet, still inhabitable and hospitable, the issue is food security to ever-growing population, pretty soon 10 billion people, food security, water availability, affordable energy, all these things is great, with great technological advances that Israel makes and also can benefit the Arab countries. They have no water to speak of, no areas that they can grow food, and they need our technology. So no longer they are letting the Palestinian, if you will, the Palestinian tail wag the Arab dog. And here the Palestinians, and again, I'm talking real politicking again, the Palestinians have missed their boats or their train time after time after time. We mentioned 1937, they had a chance to have their estate. 1947, they had a chance. 2000 Camp David, they had a chance. 2008 in Annapolis with Olmert, they had a chance. But they rejected it simply because for them, it was an anathema to have a Jewish state side by side. More than they wanted their own state, which they never had in the past history. They wanted to destroy our state. And I think the world is getting kind of tired of it. The Arabs realize that there are other challenges. The train continues to go. Events continue to move ahead. The world is different, and the Palestinians are still thinking in the same old balance of power modalities of the 20th century. And this is why they're missing time and again. And today, it's not longer the crux of for stability and security in the Middle East as they thought that were and were selling. Their campaign always was, their cause was that if you don't solve the Palestinian problem, which was a euphemism for actually destroying the state of Israel or putting all the onus on Israel to give in to a situation where it's vulnerable and not being able to defend itself, then the entire area will explode. No more people realize it's not the case, and the Palestinians now are very much back really looking at history going by. The Arab countries, they will continue to pay lip service because still there is solidarity among their own people, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, of course, and all the other countries. So they will continue to pay lip service to the Palestinian cause, but in real terms, they will do nothing. And if I can add one more thing here, Ira, and this is from experience and dialoguing with many, many Arab diplomats, of course, in secret rooms, not to be published and publicized, and of course they would never admit it. But the Arab countries, for them, a Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state on Judea and Samaria, or even Gaza, is also an existential threat on two accounts. Because if there is a Palestinian state, and against all odds, it will be democratic, because all the plans, the roadmap to peace, 2 states for 2 people, talk about first to having a democratic Palestinian state. So if Palestine is a democracy, the people of all the Arab countries will also want democracy. and they would really be existential threat to all the regimes of today in the Arab countries. Now, if it is not democratic, which is more likable, they will be a failed state, which will be a hotbed for terrorism and a springboard of radical terrorism, which will terrorize, again, the Arab countries.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the difficulty with regards to democracy, because I want to go into a little bit of a different topic here. When Jordan annexed what it called the West Bank, it had no problem doing so, especially when a Hashemite kingdom had a great majority of Palestinian identifying population. But it didn't do it, or it didn't have a problem with it, because it didn't have a conflict between a Hashemite kingdom or a Hashemite or a Jordanian identity and a democracy. Israel seems to not have the same ease with Judea and Samaria. And I think, and please correct me or make it more nuanced for me, but I think one of the challenges that Israel has with regards to Judea and Samaria is a challenge unto itself in terms of being both a Jewish and a democratic state, recognizing that the way we look at democracy is very similar to the way we look at demography. So how has at least domestically in Israel, how has the question of Judea and Samaria put strains or tension on these two identity pillars of Israel being both a Jewish state and a democratic state?
Right. Well, first of all, Ira, just to frame this issue, Israel with compassion, Judaism, and with our seeking peace, and justice, tzedek tirdof, and peace. We have been willing to make major compromises for peace with the Palestinians. But peace, we always said, peace is not a piece of paper. Peace should really be historical reconciliation between Arabs and Jews and real peaceful coexistence. This is not the case. This is why we have no peace. This is why Israel has never been able to make any concessions. Now, coming to the situation today, where we understand the landscape has already changed. And yes, it is very important for Israel. And actually, it is our, again, core values to be both democratic and Jewish. And nothing precedes the other. It is just, I would say, it is combined together, inseparable, Jewish and democratic. And for that, there is a real issue with 2.5 million Palestinians who live today in Judea and Samaria. I'm not talking about the 1.5 million or 1.8 million in Gaza, because in Gaza we're out of altogether. Also when we uprooted in order to make peace, 2005, 21 Jewish communities from Gaza, unfortunately to no avail. There's no peace, quite the contrary. But now in Judea and Samaria, we have these Palestinians, but to all those who dare say, well, you are apartheid state. We're not apartheid state. We are one man, one person, one vote country, just like all democracies in the world. And one vote or one person is one who has citizenship. All Israeli citizens are equal in all manners, shapes, or forms. Whether you're Arab, whether you're Jew, whether you're Druze or anything else, you have the same rights, the same, almost even not the same obligations. Jews has more obligation than minorities here. However, and in the Knesset, the third largest party in the Knesset is an Arab Israeli party. They're in the Supreme Court and everything. Now, in Judea and Samaria, those Arabs or Palestinians have never, ever been Israeli citizens. They were Jordanian citizens, if at all, and the status is still there. And during the Oslo agreements, Israel actually gave the Palestinians a Palestinian Authority was created, 40% of Judea and Samaria today is under control, full control of the Palestinian Authority. In this 40% of the land, 95% of all Palestinians live. So that begs a solution which will call on some identity or some kind of political entity where they have there. And it can also talk about some creative ideas of confederation between Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Jordan. There are many, many ways we can, as you say in Washington, skin the cat, or in New York, without jeopardizing Israel identity as a Jewish state with a Jewish majority.
Is it easier just to give Palestinians in Judea and Samaria autonomy or semi-autonomous authority than make them citizens? Is that the strategy? Is the strategy of, well, we can stay democratic as long as they're not citizens, so let's just give them some sort of, political independence, even if Israel maintains sovereignty, so that way we don't have to say we're not democratic because we don't have a population in our borders that are not getting the votes that a democracy would entitle them to.
It just wouldn't fly. It wouldn't be fair to us. It wouldn't be fair to them, and it will complicate things to the extreme. Today we see that countries and states or republics are broken down to a more homogeneous unit along, I would say, ethnical or national or even religious. Look at the Soviet Union. The mighty Soviet Union was broken up to 15 different nations, different countries altogether. Yugoslavia, older Yugoslavia, 6 different nations. And we can go on and on about people today that are not happy living together. You look at the Catalonians in Spain that would like their independence, the Basques in Spain. You look at Scotland that want independence from the United Kingdom. You look even at Corsica, they want independence from France, and I'm not talking about Quebec, and there are many, many other areas. So you cannot just put two people that have their own different sets of values, rules, identity, and tell them, okay, you are now one nation. This is a recipe for a constant civil war, as we have seen in Northern Ireland or anywhere else. So the issue of citizenship, I think, is out of the table and should be even discussed, which means we should go to these other things or solutions of either autonomy, some kind of link to Jordan, and as far as I'm concerned, they can have Palestinian citizenship. They will be proud citizens of this Palestinian Authority, as it is now. When we talk about quote unquote apartheid, they vote. The Palestinians vote to the Palestinian Authority. How was Abu Mazen, how did he become the president of the Palestinian Authority? He was voted by election in the Palestinian areas where they live. And that was in 2006. The fact that almost 15 years there have not been elections and they were canceled one after the other is not our issue, it's theirs. Now they're talking about elections again this coming year. So they have the right to vote, but to their own leaders in their own places where is now Palestinian Authority.
So I have to ask you, Ambassador, is the question of how to approach Judea and Samaria, both in terms of Jewish identity, looking at who is already living there, both Jewish and non-Jewish, really just a precursor or a this is a bad term to use, but a practice run for what would happen in Israel the non-Judea Samaria part of Israel? Because if you're correct, then there's going to be a balkanization, and people are going to go and devolve to smaller and smaller autonomous unions based on national identity or based on political beliefs and so forth. If you look at the birth rates in Israel, you may have the same problem in a number of years from now. So how do you look at being both Jewish and democratic if just by virtue of a population game, what you see in terms of, well, we can't have Palestinian citizens. What do you do with Jewish citizens and Israeli Arab citizens when that demography is changing? And I don't even necessarily only mean Jewish citizens versus non-Jewish citizens. You look at the difference between like Chiloni and Haredi populations who have very different political views of the state of Israel. How do you look at being both Jewish and democratic in this type of multicultural environment where a civil ethos is not unifying the country? And you see this all over the world.
Sure. So again, these are two different issues, as I think we have established. The Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, they are a totally different entity. Here in Israel, the citizens of Israel, so you have Jews and you have non-Jews. You're right. Among the Jews, also there are very many tribes, if you like, or different sections.
Historically, we've had 12, so
right,
we're used to it.
Exactly. But I would say there's much more than unites us than separates us. Even the most Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jew, and a Chiloni, secular Jew, basically, they come from the same roots. And at the end of the day, there is what binds them together is much more than what separates them. And certainly we see it if there's any extreme danger from the outside, we all galvanize and get here together. And I think it's not so bad for Judaism to be, I think unity is important, but not uniformity. So you can be we say there are shiv'im panim laTorah, like 70 ways, right, to teach the Bible. I think Judaism has always been, in a way, pluralistic. You had Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. So, part of what made us as a people was the constant, I would say, crystallization of ideas, the pilpul, the arguing for getting better, for the argumentation, not just for argumentation's sake, but to understand better the world and to prepare better for the challenges. I think this is something that has always been the case, and I hope it will come back again here. I don't want to talk about where we are today with the Orthodox in establishment in Israel. But again, if we kind of digress a little bit, I think that we need in the yeshivot here in Israel to introduce math and sciences and languages so we can give them a chance also to be their own people and give food and establish themselves and fulfill themselves. But this is only half of the story. By the same token, we have to teach more Torah and Talmud at the secular schools. So I think that would bring us to a better kind of common basis that maybe we have lost through the years. As far as the non-Jewish population, again, they're full citizens and they will always be full citizens with all rights. And the demography, I am not so concerned because there are changes of the demographic trends. And also, I think it is very important for Israel to bring up the Arab population to the same level, economic level, education level, as the Israeli Jews. And there are some trends moving toward that direction. Most Arab Israelis would love to stay Israeli citizens and not citizens of, let's say, Palestinian or Jordan, because they know what is the difference in terms of their equalities, economic benefits, and freedom, and everything else. the demographic trends are that the more educated the Arab Israelis are, less children per family they have. Israel, as a democratic country, we have the highest birth rate among democratic countries, which is around 2.9. Let's say 3 kids a family. And this is the secular one. If you add the Orthodox, and if you add the national Zionists or religious national Zionists, also, they would have much more. So if I look at all the trends, I am not so much worried about the demography change here in Israel. And we have not yet counted the 7.5 million of our brothers and sisters who live abroad, mostly in the United States, which I believe also is a great resource to tap on. And we see every year the aliyah, right? The immigration to Israel by Jews continues, sometimes in massive ways, sometimes it trickles, but it continues on. And we have maintained the same proportion now for decades. So it's about, I would say about 75% Jewish people in Israel, about 21% Arabs, and about 4 to 5% are those who are not, let's say, determined. Mostly they are those who came from the Soviet Union and have not done a conversion through the halakha. So basically we see Arabs and not Arabs is about 20-80, 8 to the non-Arabs. So I think this is something that gives us a buffer for decades and decades, and hopefully by that time, the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians will be better. And I think what will help also, and I go back to one of your questions before, is that the peace normalization that we have with the Arab countries, I think also at the end of the day, will help the Palestinians step up to the plate and make real peace.
No, thank you. I want to ask this might be our final question because it might be a bit of an answer, but going back to what you said about education and so forth. So France historically had this strategy, you could say whether it worked or not, in terms of trying to promote French culture and French ethos to even those who are not ethnically French as part of a way of incorporating or expanding French identity to those who became part of the French Empire and the French Republic and so forth. When you look at Judaism and the Jewish tradition, of course, you look at Judaism and the Jewish people as a family that became a people, that became a nation. But you also see that Judaism is a culture and a tradition with values and ethos that could be the foundation for a civil religion. And I don't mean civil religion in terms of, a secularized religion, but I mean in terms of providing symbols and identity markers that give a common language and a common identity to even those who are not Jewish. And you even see in Israel today, not only how religious courts are involved in issues of personal status, but you see a growth in Mishpat Ivri, you see a growth in Jewish traditional literature and so forth. How could the Jewish tradition, in terms of Jewish values, promote both a Israeli identity domestically, as well as look at an Israeli identity or a way of the international community understanding an Israeli identity that's not simply nationalistic or racial?
Well, here again, education is the basis. Education is the basis. And this is where I say both yeshivas and the non-religious schools should have much more a confluence in a way, and much more studies in common. I can tell you, when I studied and I went to a high school, which was a Chiloni high school, but at that time, in the 70s, mid 70s, we studied Torah 5 hours a week, and we studied Talmud. Today, they don't do it. And I think that has to be brought back. And I think, and I see more and more yearning from the secular Jews in Israel to go back to their tradition, to their history. We all have to remember that only 3-4 generations ago, we were all Haredim, Orthodox, whether in the shtetls of East Europe or in Arab countries. And yes, we made some progress. I think that here in Israel, we prove the fact that without, as we say, bli kemach and Torah. So we have to continue studies. We have to continue our to work very hard on our Jewish identity and Jewish morals, and at the same time to be open to the international community, to be or lagoim, a beacon to the nations. I think there is something of a great responsibility, since we are the first monotheistic religion. There is a lot of responsibility to that. And at the end of the day, Ira, it's all matter of leadership. So if we will see the leaders of the yeshivot, the Rashi Yeshiva, and we will see the major rabbis together with the secular politicians here in Israel, sit together and think together on a new framework for us to live with. I think all of us will benefit and enjoy it. There is nothing more enjoyable than going to a shul and read the parsha on Shabbat, or having a Shabbos dinner and doing the kiddush with the family. And more, I see more and more non-religious families do it as well. At the same time, as we mentioned, I would like to see the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, who are now not a part of the labor market or the academic. More of them do the same. It's not mutually exclusive to be Jewish and to be, I would say, belongs to the international environment, as Israel is. Israel is very much dependent on the international environment. Most of our economy comes out of exports, and which is very, very good. So again, we should be, as many of our forefathers said, be a Jew at home and a proud man and citizen in the streets. And Jews, all throughout history, we always were the most loyal citizens to the kings and to the rulers of every country we were, in Europe, United States, or anything else, without compromising our Jewishness. This can be done, and if it was done in other countries, certainly it can be done here in our home state and land.
No, I agree with you. It's funny, I always use the term that Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch used in terms of the Mensch Yisrael. It's not simply being the Jew at home and the man in the street, but you are one and the same in both places. If you are both a Mensch and a Jew, that allows you to be confident and strong in everywhere that you go. And as Hillel said, in a place where there are no men, it is time for us to stand up and be the men. Ambassador Ayalon, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really not often that we have a chance to speak so honestly and in depth, both in terms of who we are as Jews, who we are, understanding that not only are our people defined by the Bible, or as the Declaration of the Establishment of Israel says, the Book of Books, but the state of Israel gives deference and justification for its existence on the Book of Books itself. I've been to a number of different types of talks like this, and it's not often that I get to hear clearly, honestly, both the challenges that Israel faces, but more importantly, the way Israel can stand on its own accord and not defer to international perspectives or defer to pressures that are not of its own integrity. So I want to not only thank you for your time, but I also want to thank the Miriam Institute for creating these types of programs. The Miriam Institute is very unique in its ability to do this. It prides itself not only on making sure that conversations, difficult conversations, I think the conversation that we had today, while important, was not easy, like maybe easy for us, but not easy to say publicly all the time. The Miriam Institute gives people opportunity to hear these types of conversations, but as if not more importantly, it doesn't pick an ideology for the sake of ideology. It allows for many different types of voices to be heard so that people are informed in the decisions that they make, so people are informed in the positions that exist, and people have the information to articulate their beliefs with integrity, with depth, and with the possibility for a better future. So again, Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. And as well, thank you to the Miriam Institute and for everyone who was on to engage and participate. Of course, we did the talking, but that's what we do. Participate by listening and hopefully take the ideas that we heard today and have them in our family tables, in our neighborhoods, and when we discuss both on and offline about the importance of Israel and the strategic importance of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. So thank you again.
Thank you, Ira. I would second everything you said. And again, thank you, and thank you, Benjamin, and the Miriam Institute for having me.
I'll end here, and hopefully, Ambassador, will be able to speak again, and many times in the future.
Absolutely. Okay.
Very good.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.